Before we begin today, we want to play a trailer from our friends at the podcast Crime Culture, in which the hosts explain how true crime and pop culture intersect. Here's Crime Culture.
Is your Netflix queue basically all true crime movies and series?
Do you ever wonder why you can't open a bottle of Tylenol without using the jaws of life? Crime Culture, hosted by me, Haley Langan,
and me, Caitlin Mahar,
is a podcast that discusses true crime, pop culture, and how the two relate. From killers that have inspired hit films like Silence of the Lambs,
to the motives for crimes such as the murder of John Lennon. Join Haley and me every Tuesday to discover the pop culture side of true crime.
If you are just tuning in, we encourage you to go back and listen from episode 1. This podcast may contain content that is graphic and disturbing in nature. Listener discretion is advised.
To submit a theory, a tip, a question, or comment, please email us at tips@directappealpodcast.com or call us and leave a voicemail at 732-510-0996. As a reminder, Melanie will be answering your questions in a bonus episode. So don't forget to submit your questions by July 31st via email or voicemail.
Previously on Direct Appeal.
How about the dog hair that was found in the bags with his body? Where was this body packaged?
It's been made a lot out of that. Oh, she just got rid of his clothes like 2 days after she found out. In my mind, I'm getting divorced. We're packing up. We're moving, and I'm not aware he's dead. It's so grisly as to pretty much negate the possibility that anybody could do this without leaving forensic evidence behind. The mattress had gone to the dump, but at the very least, you can see it's not soaked in blood. All of these comparisons and found nothing. I'm indicted because a number of anonymous communications had been received. They found DNA and fingerprints, this communication, that didn't match anybody. This is the stuff that I was ultimately acquitted of.
This is episode 12, The Verdict. So there are a couple more things that we should talk about with the defense. One of the things that Melanie brought up as concerning to her was not just the witnesses and the experts and who Joe didn't call, but she also brought up the fact that Joe was under some type of investigation at the time of her trial.
And ultimately, I would find out that one of my attorneys was under federal investigation at that time and had just been advised of that. Now, apparently, legally, it's some gray area as to whether or not he has the responsibility to inform a client that he's representing at that point, because obviously his attention, as anybody's attention, would be elsewhere at that time. But what I'm told, at least by some people, is that because it's a different jurisdiction, he didn't have an obligation to inform me. To me, that just flies in the face of common sense. That's kind of when our defense went on fast forward, the experts dried up, and all of a sudden I wasn't testifying anymore.
Okay, so what is she talking about? What is this investigation? And should she have been made aware? So Joe at one point represented Bernard Kerik. Mm-hmm. You ever heard of Bernie Kerik?
Sounds familiar, but I can't place it.
For about a year, he was the police commissioner.
Okay.
In New York City. So here's the story about Bernard Kerik and Joe's involvement and what happened. So Bush nominated Kerik, and this is Bush Jr. nominated Kerik as the Secretary of U.S. Department of Homeland Security in December 2004. But Kerik pretty quickly withdrew his nomination. An investigation ensued into his actions while he served as the New York City Police Commissioner from 2000 to 2001. He was also the New York City Correction Department Commissioner from 1995 to 2000. So an investigation ensues, and ultimately what happens is Kerik pleads guilty in Bronx Supreme Court to failing to report a loan and accepting a financial gift.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't really know much about what happened. I remember it was news then, and I remember he pled guilty to something, and he accepted a financial gift. You know, when you're in office, you're not supposed to.
Yeah.
So someone's giving him money for something. He pleads guilty. Mm-hmm. His lawyer was Joe Tacopina.
Okay.
So what Kerik later claims is that he was convinced to take the plea by false representations made by his attorney, Joe Tacopina. Kerik was investigated subsequently in the federal district in 2006, and Tacopina stopped representing him after he was served with a grand jury subpoena. At that time, Tacopina, according to Kerik, started cooperating with federal prosecutors. Carrick subsequently pled guilty in the Southern District of New York in 2009 to tax fraud and false statements. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison, and he served his time at, from what I remember, at a minimum security institution in Maryland. So that was 4 years. And he eventually files a complaint against Tockerman. And again, he's alleging that, Joe convinced him to do certain things, to take a deal, that he was his representation. He stopped representing him and he started cooperating with the federal prosecutors who prosecuted Carrick on other charges.
Okay, so he sort of like switched sides. And then so after Tockerman switched sides, that's when Carrick went after him?
Yeah, well, Carrick actually, so Carrick, Joe is not representing Carrick anymore. And he was talking to the prosecutors, maybe cooperating in the investigation against Carrick, but it might have been that he was not cooperating. It might have been that there was nothing to do with the case before. I think, as I understand it, Joe Tockerman was also friends with Carrick.
Okay.
On the outside. So he had come under some type of investigation. Let me just say this, though, before I even give you the information that's relevant here. Bernie Carrick filed a suit against Joe. He filed a complaint against him.
Civil suit you're talking about?
Yeah, he filed a civil suit against him. I think it was like 2014. It was later on. The suit was dismissed.
Okay.
And Joe then filed, as I understand it, Joe Tockerman, this is all from, I pulled this, I'm getting these online.
Public records.
Yeah, public records. And Joe then later filed, I think, a defamation suit against Bernie for, and then I think that Bernard Carrick filed a countersuit. And as I understand it,
match.
Exactly. As I understand it, just so to be clear, I think all the suits have been dismissed.
Okay.
And I think, I know that Carrick's suit was this suit was definitely, the initial one was definitely dismissed. I know the counter one filed by Carrick was dismissed.
What about the counter?
I know Joe's was dismissed as well, but I think it had some merit. Like it was dismissed. There was some stipulation, maybe like with merit or something. I'm not really sure.
Okay.
I don't really know the exact. They were all pretty much dismissed. But here's why. Why is it relevant? It's relevant because this was going on at the time of Melanie's trial. It's relevant because he was meeting with prosecutors, I guess, during that time. And let's see, here's why it's relevant. It alleges this in this suit, even though this complaint was dismissed. I'm sure some of the dates have to be correct.
Yeah.
So it looks like in this, it says about March 12th, 2007, federal prosecutors involved in the grand jury investigation against Mr. Carrick served Mr. Tockerman with a grand jury subpoena calling for the blanket production of records from his law firm relating to Bernard Carrick. On information, soon after, defendant Tockerman was informed that he himself was under investigation by the U.S. Attorney's Office for financial and tax crimes. Now, do I know if that, this suit was dismissed, so I don't know about any of these, maybe all of these allegations were dismissed, but the time frame that we're looking at, if he was served with the subpoena on March 12th, that's Melanie's trial.
Yeah.
That's prime time.
So you're suggesting that he had a lot going on at the time?
Yeah, I'm suggesting that he had a lot going on at the time. Melanie says that too. She's like, I didn't know at the time. Why was Joe? She said that he was seemingly more preoccupied, right?
Okay.
There were things going on, and she's saying he's getting things wrong. He did this great job on cross-examination, but then all of a sudden he's falling off the wagon. And
what about Toronto? He's like, does he take in a back seat at some point?
Well, Toronto's co-counsel, and he does, as we talked about, he does the work, but he's not the face of the trial. Steve Toronto did the opening.
And the closing was?
Done by Joe. But
Tockerman. Okay.
That's a good way to lead us into the closing, actually, because according to Melanie, Joe paid an outside firm to write the closing statements or the summation.
Now, in terms of the closing, it turns out that Joe retained someone to prepare the closing for him. It's not like they had this from the beginning, like, okay, these people, hi, this is Sally and Joe, and they're going to do our closing arguments and, it's day one of the trial. No, these people had not been there. And he contracted with somebody to prepare this closing argument, and they know what they're doing. They'll be able to do it much better than I could. I'm a courtroom guy. I'm not the guy who sits there and makes up graphics and stuff like that. Hell, if I had known that, I would have prepared the damn PowerPoint slides. I certainly could have. Now, if you're going to spend $35,000 on anything, it should have been other experts.
$35,000?
$35,000.
Are they hiring? I want to do that too. That's wow.
So I want to say for the record, I don't have anything to substantiate this claim.
Okay.
Melanie has said it a number of times to me, and to her credit, 95% of what she said to me in terms of the legal stuff, I've been able to verify, but I don't have any receipts or anything.
But you have been able to verify that he did, in fact, hire someone to write the closing?
I haven't, no.
Okay.
This is all according to Melanie.
Okay.
And so she said 35,000. And I said, 35? This is a lot of money. Okay.
Yeah.
So I saw your face. I thought we should pause because you look like you're about to freak out.
He started with, luminol reacts with blood and bleach, so even if I had cleaned up, you would still see luminol. If I'd bleached the apartment, there would have been, positives all over the place. Okay, fine. Mentions that nobody checked at the Econo Lodge, the brochure that was on the front seat of Bill's car. Now, I get that you're trying to point out deficiencies here. To me, that's not what you lead with. That's not the biggest gaping hole here. He argued that they didn't investigate Jim or Brad, which isn't a good argument because they did. At least Brad. That I know. They turned his life upside down. That only one bullet had fibers on it, and it doesn't make sense to silence only one shot. Now, again, the things that were being brought out by people who hadn't been present for the whole trial. Imagine how overwhelming the information was to them. And, he said, you tell jurors don't play detective, but he referred them, he said, I want you to go look at the records in evidence that were never displayed to you. Well, they were never displayed to the jury because you agreed to stipulate to them. Bill's pharmacy background, things like the credit card statements, bank statements, phone, stuff that would have been good to kind of put in front of somebody's nose. You stipulated to them. So now you're going to tell the jury to go look at the stuff that isn't in evidence when they've got so much evidence to sort through. He said that Bill was taking depression medication. He alluded to that. That's incorrect. Bill's sister, Cindy, testified to the fact that their other sister believed he needed medication, and Cindy herself even admitted that she thought he might have depression and or might be bipolar, but he wasn't on medication. So where the hell does that come from? They had pulled so many different recording snippets, if you will. You'd find Joe saying, okay, this is the last one I'm going to play, or here, I'm going to skip over this one, or I'm going to, if you're skipping over it, like, why is it in there? If you're skipping things from your own summation, what does that make it look like?
I have to agree. I thought that was troubling to me, just offhand going, he's looking through the summation going, skip, usually when you're writing your summation, we can talk about this in a minute, but this is all the critical points. And
this is like one of the most important, if not the most important part of, this is the last thing the jury's left with.
Last thing they're left with.
Do you want me to wait?
Yeah, let's wait. Let's wait. I just had to stop.
He was saying basically anybody that wasn't called by the state, we would have called. Like, for instance, Dr. Scott from my practice. If the state hadn't called him, we would have called him. But as he was going on with that, he was going, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, you can't et cetera over anything in a closing argument when you're supposed to be drawing things together. The phrase people use a lot is like phoning it in. It's beyond that. It's like phoning it in with half a battery. You gave them nothing even remotely comparable. You just left them with Patty's version of events. By the time that was over, I was sick to my stomach, and the courthouse had flooded that day. So we got our closing done, and the courthouse was closed for the rest of the day. So the state got all night to rewrite their closing, at which they led with first thing the next morning. There was so much more that could have been said, and Joe is a very charismatic guy when he wants to be, but he wasn't on. I can't think of any other way to say it. He just wasn't on. Knowing what I know now was going on in his life, it explains just about everything.
Before I talk about the general issue here, I'm curious, what is the Econo Lodge brochure? That's the first time I've heard about that.
The Econo Lodge. Okay, so there were a couple things found in Bill's car.
You say Econo, I say Econo, whatever.
I just had to correct you. Yeah. There are a couple things found in Bill's car. So I guess, the chloral hydrate was found in his car, but they found a brochure for an Econo Lodge.
Where? Without an
hotel.
AC?
Yeah, and something else. Another AC brochure.
But they didn't investigate? It sounds like they didn't.
Not to my knowledge.
Because you would think they would have at least gone to those and said, hey, can we see your footage, like your cameras?
Maybe they did.
Okay.
I don't know either way is the answer.
Okay. I think most importantly is, I guess you can't, but doesn't this seem a little bit about like inadequate defense? Or is an inadequate defense claim only relevant if it is considered something that would have drastically changed the course of events? Or
so the decision to retain, again, affirm. So I consulted with two people that I knew in this field, and one of them, the expert, is going to talk to us at some point. But and what I've heard is that it's not the standard practice. Like most attorneys want to write their own.
But if you're hiring,
want to write their own summation, which is also the closing.
So for me, it wasn't even the fact that that he didn't write it, which yes, I was questioning that, but the fact that there was incorrect information in the closing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That probably is not strong enough to make an inadequate defense claim.
So they're going to bring it up later on when Melanie files her appeal. Okay. She will bring it up on ineffective counsel.
Oh, she does. Okay.
Does she actually? It's a question. Does she bring up this issue? I think she does. I don't think it was one of her strongest points.
Yeah, I'm questioning it myself. I don't know that it's strong, but I do know that there's a case to be made because we know that the weight of closing on jurors and the fact that the closing got botched up. I mean,
I agree. He missed points, but he got things wrong. So I think
missing points is one thing, but saying inadequate.
Yeah, there were a couple of things that were wrong. And then you heard the end. So what happened was they closed on his closing, and Patty didn't have to go.
Well, that's my biggest issue. Is the jury is getting to whoever they're hearing from last is going to stick with them, right? The fact that it's like the slate's washed clean, whatever he said yesterday, I forgot about it, and all I'm hearing is Patty.
Well, now they're going to hear.
And then I'm going to deliberate.
Right.
So that's the problem.
The problem is she had an extra night. She got to change. Think about how much time she had. She got to go home. And I don't know what her closing initially was, but whatever Joe addressed, if there was anything that she took issue with,
oh my God,
she gets a whole night to sit down and rewrite it if she wants. She could rewrite the whole closing if she wants, which I'm sure did not happen. But
I'm sure there's no way she didn't take something from that.
I would imagine
it's almost like them showing you their cards, right? It's like usually it doesn't happen like that.
Yeah, no. I'm sure that it does happen in cases where, look, closing arguments sometimes will go a long time. If you think about it, in murder trials, sometimes closing arguments can be, 6 hours. So I do think that it happens in instances. Okay. It definitely does. But in this time, I don't think it was planned.
Do you know about how long the closing was?
There were a couple hours. So,
his was?
Yeah, his was a couple hours. So I think Melanie said, I'm sure we could find this out, but I think Melanie said about 2 hours, maybe a little bit longer.
Okay.
Regardless circumstance, whether, whatever, she got, extra time. So I asked Melanie, Melanie talked about Joe's closing statements as the end of their defense. Mm-hmm. And then I asked her, well, what about Patty's closings? Because then, the prosecution gets to do their closing statement. And she said, well, she told a story. We didn't have a story, but Patty tells a story. Does she get everything right? No. Does she exaggerate? Yes. So
the story is important too. And Tacopina did not have a story whatsoever, right?
No, Patty sure did.
Uh-huh.
His closing was one thing, but then hearing her closing was so markedly different and so much stronger that it really kind of terrified me. So the next day she gets up and she starts, and she's saying, okay, basically Melanie doesn't get points for being clever in certain areas of this. Whereas Joe had tried to say, well, she can't be basically an evil genius and a bumbling idiot at the same time. We start with the gun is consistent with the Meghan model and that whole mantra. And she's trying to say that there are no calls from me to Bill, and that means clearly that I already knew he was dead. Is it possible that night, maybe in celebration, they were having a drink when the chloral hydrate was administered? I would say whatever started, that execution started to be. The execution of the murder started in the apartment that night. And I would suggest to you it's very difficult to move someone who is unconscious, especially in an apartment complex. But is it possible? Of course it's possible. And I don't have to prove it happened in the apartment, but we are going to go over the evidence because I submit to you there's an abundance of evidence that does suggest that indeed it did happen in the apartment. She said it occurred in the shower stall, talked about the positioning of the body. She tried as much as she could to sort of anticipate their holes. Then she starts with drop cloth. Well, anybody who, the defense is making it sound like it's this huge, gruesome scene and nobody would ever be able to clean it up, but they would. Medical examiners do it every day. We kind of said, okay, there's no cut marks. There's no anything in the tub. You would see chips in the porcelain. silence. In fact, Mr. Lesniak testified that there was no disturbance to the bottom of the stall, to the tile around the stall. And she said that ties in the razor stubble being stuck to the tape in the bathroom. But she's tying this up really neatly. Yep, real easy to think about razor stubble in a bathroom. She's making the explanations cleaner and neater. She also argued that I could have silenced the saw or saws with a pillow or a towel. Let that one hang out there for a minute. I don't know about that. But kicking him. Yeah, but you look scared if you object during the closing. Dude, what? She just said that I silenced a circular saw with a towel. Where is that in evidence?
Okay, so one of the most ridiculous things I think I've ever heard, and during this this trial, is that Melanie silenced a reciprocating saw with a pillow or a towel.
I can't imagine that.
Like an electric saw during, cutting away. I thought that was. I think that's one of those ludicrous moments. And I like what Melanie said. Okay, we'll let that one hang out there funny. For a minute.
Yeah, I love her little sayings. Also, I know that Melanie was not a suspect right away, but I'm assuming they interviewed people. Wouldn't Melanie, or was she? You gave me a look like she was.
They interviewed her pretty quickly.
And she didn't have any cuts on her, right? If you're using a saw to cut up a body, wouldn't you hurt yourself at some point? Or are you, you're upset and you're trying to do this quick and quiet and, right?
Well, I don't know. Did you saw yourself? Is that what you mean?
I don't know. You would think she'd have.
There's no knife. It's a saw. It's
know, but I don't know. I just feel like the way they painted as if she was doing a lot of physical labor here. I would expect some sort of bruising. I don't know.
Maybe it was her accomplice that did this part.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Okay.
I'm not really sure, but I did think the reciprocating saw was ridiculous.
Yeah. And what's the razor stubble? I don't understand what that's all about.
Yeah, there were hairs found on the tape on the garbage bags. And I think the prosecution's assertion was that these were like stubble, razor stubble, and that it obviously came from Melanie tracking Bill's razor stubble from the bathroom where she was, cutting up his body. At least I think that's what they were inferring or implicating. And so I guess Melanie's talking about now, why didn't they object to this, some of this stuff? And
she said it would have made them look defensive. Is that what she said?
Defensive, yeah. Right? So it's like calling attention to something like, no,
Yeah.
Well, she's arguing facts, not in evidence. But at one point, Patty says, where is it? She admits, and you heard it in her own voice, she admits to parking the car at the Flamingo, and then she claims to take a cab from Atlantic City to Woodbridge. And because she couldn't find her car, and she sleeps on the way, and then takes yet another cab from the Woodbridge train station back to Atlantic City. He stands up and says, Your Honor, I object. That's an absolute mischaracterization of the evidence. How is it an absolute mischaracterization? This may be one of the few non-mischaracterizations.
So that part was correct. Patty's what Melanie's saying.
So the one thing that's correct, Joe.
I'm sure it wasn't the one thing, but yes, it was by and large. She said that was right, and he objected and said mischaracterization. She was like, no, what? That is actually right. That's what that's what happened. Okay. So that's what she's saying there.
It's just the context she's painting it in. Now that I can't blame on any company paid to do a closing. This is him at this point. Where's your head? Are you high? We just spent 8 weeks doing this. How do you not know this story inside, outside, back, front? How do you not know it? Mr. Lowery, let me just digress here since I have this right in front of me. You heard from Mr. Lowery on the defense case who told you, and this is in the transcript, he had a conversation with Bill about purchasing a gun. But there is no evidence before you or during this trial that Bill wanted to purchase a gun. The prosecution argued against the inclusion of that testimony, and now she's putting the exclusion of this information forward before the jury as proof of guilt. So you argued to keep it out. The judge said, okay, we'll keep it out. And then you go in front of a jury and you say, well, because this isn't here, clearly she's lying, and my own team doesn't stand up and object. She's asking, for instance, where was I on May 3rd? You didn't hear any evidence of where I was. Well, where I was RMA, updating my HR information and stuff like that. And she knows that, and she knows that very well. But because it wasn't brought out, anything that we failed to illustrate, she seized upon whether it was accurate or not, whether it pointed to my guilt or not. So she knew damn good and well where I was on May 3rd, because she had all the records, because otherwise you would have been hearing about nothing else but May 3rd. Her explanations were so much neater because it didn't require speculation in a bunch of different areas. Had I been on the stand, I could have said, this is what happened. We began with this, and run through the timeline in such a way that you can't when you're trying to piece it together with different witnesses. It's much harder. So it's kind of, I don't want to say he said, she said, but we're going back and forth, and it's going to end up being, who do you believe? Well, if you presented experts for some things, you haven't presented experts for other things, and you just kind of leave them hanging there, what does it look like? She told a story. She told a story. Whether that story had holes in it at times or whether that story was unbelievable at times, it was a lot better than our story, which was non-existent.
It's a story. She did tell a story. I think that the arguments about, well, you didn't hear this. Yeah, ick.
Yeah, I don't like that either.
Ick. But they have a lot of latitude in closing arguments. It's not evidence. The judge definitely instructs them at some point that this is not. Now, they're not supposed to argue things that are, completely out of the scope.
But they could speculate.
Yeah, they can. So while I don't like some of the things she argued, she was just, you could say she's a zealous prosecutor. She's a good prosecutor. She nailed it. She told a story, and Melanie felt her stomach sinking in as Patty was doing this. Sorry, any questions? Because I want to say what happened right after.
No, I was just curious. It sounds like that's at the point where Melanie probably started to get pretty worried.
She's definitely worried. I mean, she's on trial for murder anyway.
Yeah.
And so with that,
she probably thought that it was
she wasn't sure what to think. She had mixed feelings throughout. At this point, once the state finishes their closing, the case is over. The state rests, the defense rests, and now it goes to the jury. And the jury has to deliberate until they come up with a verdict. So Melanie talks about right after the trial. What was it like waiting for the verdict?
And while we were waiting for the jury to come back, we were out that weekend, and then at one point the jury came back and asked for a readback, something about testimony that had to do with the anonymous communication. So Joe and Steve are using this opportunity to reassure me, and it made sense at the time. Hey, if they're sweating the charges about the anonymous communication, there's no way they found you guilty of murder. There's no way they'd find you guilty of murder and be sweating these charges over here. You definitely don't think that you're going to be convicted of such a heinous crime that you have no involvement in it. I mean, it's mind-boggling. And of course, intellectually, I can step back and I can say, okay, well, these are the things that make me look involved. These are the things that make me look guilty. Of course there are. You're cohabitating with somebody. Your lives are inextricably intertwined. That's why the spouse is always the first person.
So I would have thought this. I would have thought the same thing, right? Like, oh, they're reviewing testimony about the anonymous communication, whether or not I wrote a letter or not. If they're sweating that, I would have the same indicator. I think I would have had.
Yeah. How long were they? I don't know if you're going to get to this. If so, then you could tell me.
If I'm not mistaken,
and
it was
they were
a
not
couple
sequestered.
Of days. Yeah, they were not sequestered. So this is what it's like. She's waiting. So I guess you go through, you're asking me, what did she think? Well, she wasn't sure what to think, right? Like there were times where she said she felt like, Joe would say, no, we're doing good. Like, look at what we punched holes. And she'd go, okay. And then she, describes feeling like, lackluster after they put on their case. Like we didn't really do a great job. But again, Joe reassures her we didn't have to. We punched holes in everything. So then she hears the closing by him. She describes after his closing in Patty, she said she felt, and I remember saying this to me, deflated. Yep. She thought, okay, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
And then when they got word that, the jury was debating the anonymous communication, she again, and her lawyers are like, this is great.
It's like a roller coaster,
It's
right?
a total roller coaster ride for her. So this is how she describes waiting for the verdict. And then the verdict actually comes in.
I remember one of the sheriff's officers telling Steve that he thought they were getting close. And eventually they came and they said, okay, we've got it. And I'm trying to send a message to the person I'm with at the time, who's been with me throughout this entire prep for trial and whatever, and I'm trying to email him, and all I can get out is, my hands are shaking so badly, all I can get out is now. I couldn't even form any other words. They brought us into the courtroom, and I remember standing, I remember waiting for the jury to be seated, and at that point, looking at their faces, and I'm thinking, oh my God, and don't read into it, you're going to know in 10 seconds, shut up. I'm having this inner dialogue in my head, and, two voices going back and forth, look at them, don't look at them, oh my God, their faces. Before you know it, they give the verdict, and I don't remember a lot after that. I remember kind of grabbing Joe, and I remember saying, my kids, and I don't really remember much after that. I do remember being taken to county. Waiting to get from the verdict to sentencing was excruciating, absolutely excruciating. You're thinking, okay, well, we're going to appeal, we're going to do all of this, and you have no sense of how slow it is, how long it takes. About 3 months. In fact, really nobody gives a shit, so nobody's helping you when it comes to things like transcripts, we had talked about what to expect, and at this point, my thing was, I really don't give a shit what you say, because I'm protesting my innocence here. You can tell me 30, you can tell me life, you can tell me double life. I don't really give a shit. I'm not owning any of it. I'm not accepting any of it, because I'm still at that point in my head, at that point in time, no, this is a grievous injustice, and as tired and as hurt and as beaten down as I am, I'm not accepting that. I expected the worst, and what I got was just one step shy of the worst. And really, for all intents and purposes, they're indistinguishable. I was given life with the possibility for parole. However, life for the purposes of parole in the state of New Jersey is 75 years. So I was given life plus 5. So that's 80 years I would have to do 85% of due to the No Early Release Act. And long story short, that puts me parole eligible at the tender age of 101. So at that point, you may as well have given me life without parole. The judge was duty-bound to give me no less than 30. That's the mandatory minimum.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've seen it as well, Meghan, when the verdict was read and her reaction. It's kind of hard to watch.
Yeah.
Right?
No,
she's
really
grabbing onto
probably
her lawyer for
this is
dear life.
One of those famous scenes that people will remember again. It's hard to watch for sure. She has a very emotional reaction.
Yep.
She grabs onto Joe, and I think what she says is, my babies, my babies. And she just starts crying and pulling him in, and he's trying to remain calm and standing.
Yeah,
and
he's pretty stoic, right?
He was pretty stoic. I think he was surprised, but I think he hit it well. But she really goes, she loses it, of course. They say, it's funny because they say, you'll see these cases, and I've seen so many trials where the defendants, they say guilty, and they have nothing.
Yeah.
They don't move. They just look, and I'm always like, God.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is this the reaction of an innocent person? What she had, is that
But a guilty person reacts like that too.
Right? Do they?
Yeah. Because if you're guilty, you're still getting your babies taken away from you. You're still, going away for a long time.
Right. Well, I think we would encourage anyone who's listening to, our listeners to at least take a look. You can Google, YouTube.
It was on Court TV. Yeah.
It was on Court TV, so everyone can see the verdict.
Or the whole trial, right?
I don't, it must be archival footage. They don't have the whole thing, or I haven't seen the whole thing. But there are various
You could probably
clips.
get the openings, the closing, the bigger parts on YouTube.
You can get some of this bit by bit. I mean, we've done tidbit by tidbit. We've looked at various scenes, but you can't get the whole thing anymore unless, I don't know, you're requested. It's old. Court TV doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, it's now True TV, right?
I think so. Yeah. Or is it? Yeah, it's True TV. Maybe. Okay. So this is the end. The trial is over. Melanie has been convicted for the murder of her husband.
And what was the date of the verdict?
Oh, it was shortly after. So the trial began in March. So
it was...
The verdict was sometime in April, the end of April 2007.
Gotcha.
So this is 3 years after. So this is April 2007. So it's 3 years after. So,
and she's been incarcerated since.
Yes. So after Melanie will talk about after the verdict, how she was in jail for a time and then she was waiting to be moved. And she's going to tell you about what it was like right after the verdict before she was transferred. And next time we'll talk about where she is now. Next time on Direct Appeal. Is Melanie an innocent woman wrongfully convicted, or is she a cold-hearted murderer, as the prosecution alleged? We will reveal our conclusions on the last episode of Direct Appeal. Direct Appeal is hosted by Meghan Sachs and Amy Shlosberg. Our producer is James Varga. The story arc was written by Meghan Sachs. Music and underscore by Desert Media. Recorded, mixed, and edited by Justin Kral at JC Studios. Special thanks to Alan Tockerman, whose work was integral to this production.
To view photos, evidence, and engage with other listeners, visit directappealpodcast.com and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
If you have a tip, you can submit through our website or by emailing tips@directappealpodcast.com.
You can also help us out by leaving a 5-star review on Apple iTunes or wherever you listen.